China and Japan are about to take the concept of war to a whole new level, as tensions between the two nations grow dangerously. Complete with tens of allies picking sides, billions of dollars in spending, and powerful war-dictating hypersonic missiles, a war between these two world powers could send more shockwaves around the world than a nuclear explosion. And it's all thanks to certain events that have caused massive tension between the two nations. Too many events over the last few years have contributed their fair share of tensions between China and Japan, each one inching the nations closer to war with each other. Every year since 2012, Chinese coastal vessels have intruded into Japan's territorial waters at least 19 times, a number that has gotten as high as 52 times a year. Each of these intrusions are considered intentional provocations by China in waters that it doesn't recognize as belonging to Japan, but instead to Taiwan. And China has long claimed Taiwan is a Chinese breakaway province that it plans to reabsorb. The US and allies such as Japan have promised to maintain Taiwan's sovereignty, even if that means war with China. Last year saw the most frequent and prolonged presence of Chinese vessels in the disputed waters at 352 days. As recently as last month, on February 8th, Chinese Coast Guard vessels passed just outside of the territorial waters of Japan-controlled islands, which China also claims. This was the 49th day in a row. With each voyage, it seemed like the Chinese ships inched nearer and nearer to the islands, almost like they were surveilling them. Just a week prior, on February 1st, a Chinese guided missile destroyer and frigate crossed the waters between Okinawa and the Miyako Islands as they moved south, causing the deployment of a Japanese Self-Defense Force warship and a reconnaissance aircraft. On Saturday, February 3rd, a reconnaissance ship passed the area to the north. Then on Sunday, the Chinese reconnaissance ship showed up in the waters again. On Monday, February 5th, the guided missile destroyer and the frigate were spotted crossing the waters between Okinawa and Miyako. China routinely sends Coast Guard vessels and planes into waters and airspace surrounding these islands to harass Japanese vessels in the area and force Japan to scramble jets in response. It has worked repeatedly against Japan. Japan has warned China's vessels against further approaching the islands, called the Senkaku in Japanese, while Beijing calls them the Diaoyu. For the Chinese, there could be consequences. According to the Japanese Coast Guard, the actions of its Chinese counterparts violate international law. And since their presence there is extremely unpredictable, they become extremely dangerous. A missile strike from these waters could take seconds to strike Japan, leaving no time for any effective response. In August 2022, China launched 5 missiles into Japan's exclusive economic zone to the east of Taiwan. According to analysts, the launches were a warning to both the United States and Japan about coming to the aid of Taiwan in the event of a conflict there. Some sort of reminder that Chinese missiles could strike not only Taiwan, but also American bases in the region, such as the Kadena Air Base on Japan's soil, as well as any marine invasion forces. Clearly, the trigger events for conflict between China and Japan are countless. In response to China's invasive actions, Japan has begun investing heavily in military assets that would not only defend Japan in light of Chinese attacks, but could also enable Japan to take the fight to China. This is in contrast to Japan's near-century-long vow of peace post-World War II, which forbids the nation from wielding primarily offensive military assets. But desperate times call for desperate measures, and from Japan's perspective, these are the most desperate of times. And the resulting desperate measure by Japan is a mighty destructive arsenal of missiles. Japan's arsenal of missiles. China's intrusions into Japan's territories have been grave issues of national security. When the 5 Chinese missiles landed in 2022, the Japanese government issued a formal protest to China and called on it to immediately stop its intrusive military exercises. But that was far from all the government did. Unsurprisingly, China's activities have strengthened the argument for a more military-armed Japan. Japan has been working closely with its allies, particularly the United States, to make this happen. Preparing for a potential conflict, military planners have increased coordination with American forces and moved more troops and missile batteries to islands in southern Japan, which could be on the front lines of the clash. There have been talks around Japan hosting American nuclear weapons on its soil. Talks that were unthinkable just a decade ago when Japan's vow of peace was still very much in place. But aside from stronger formations with the US and its assets, Japan's survival may also rest on its own first strike and counter-strike abilities. Conflict with China could easily divert American resources to other uses, leaving Japan in a bit of a situation. Efforts are therefore underway to heavily arm Japan itself with war-dictating missiles built by Japan or